live on the rec yard. We are talking about men's prisons versus women's prisons. I'm Marcy Marie.
I'm Tunchi.
Tunchi, she just never gets her cue quite on time. And we've been saying it this way for a few episodes now. But
Well, because I'm still just really distracted by the fact we don't have any music yet. Because when it
I'm
comes in, I want to
you want to be
dance.
vibing already.
Right.
We didn't have music on the rec yard, Tunch.
It was in my head.
In county, we would sneak out our little radios on the rec yard, our little
Oh.
handheld radios, and we could jam to them there. So y'all didn't
Well,
ever do that.
we could never ever do anything like that. But
Did
there
people
is
do that and you were just too scared?
Oh, funny lady. You're a funny lady. No, we didn't. We didn't have any radios or music in Fort Bend County Jail. Nothing like that. Barely had
Even
hot water.
inside?
That's
Even
correct.
inside?
Even inside, yeah. Our cells
Oh.
were nothing. We didn't have any type of some snacks and maybe some long johns you could buy, and we had to buy our feminine hygiene products as well. So if you didn't have money, then you better get a sock, girl,
Are you
because
serious?
yeah,
Right?
I'm serious. Yeah,
We
you had to
need
buy it.
We need to do a full episode on that county jail, on your experience. We should do a county jail
Oh
anyways, y'all,
yeah.
in all seriousness, because that's a whole different deal. So we have a special guest, and he's my friend. I met him through TikTok first and then Facebook. He did time in Oklahoma. And so when he's ready, he's gonna let me know by turning his camera on, and I'll pop him on here. Um, but we're ready for questions. We want to know what you guys want to know about men's prisons. And if you're a guy watching and you have something to say, let us know. Put it in the chat, and I will Tunchi and I will try to respond to that. We're so glad for you folks that are already tuning in. We appreciate y'all so much. Um, so, okay, Tunch, James is ready. So I want you to meet him. I'm excited for you to meet him.
Okay. Let's do it.
Hey, James.
How's it going?
Hi,
Good.
James.
Thanks so much for coming on here like last minute. I'm y'all, we had someone else scheduled, another guest scheduled, and he had a family emergency this morning, and my friend James stepped up. I messaged him and he got right on it, and here he is. We're so excited. So y'all all have been asking a lot of questions about, or y'all suggested we do this episode. We did this episode based on y'all's suggestions. So we definitely want to know what you guys want to know. So we'll answer live as we normally do. And let's start with James. Tell us how much time you did and what state you did your time in.
Well, my name is James Fleming. I did 9 years, 4 months in total in Oklahoma. First time, never been in trouble before, which was kind of devastating. You know, that pill that you have to swallow whenever you realize that you're going to do that much time is just kind of, it's hard to swallow, but you know, it made me who the person I am today, made me the person that I am today. And you know, I would never change that. That's a blessing from God in disguise for sure.
Well, James, what was your sentence if you served 9 years and 4 months? I'm just curious if you made parole or.
Well, so in Oklahoma, they have two different sentencing types. They have like 85%, which is, of course, you serve 85% of your sentence. And then they have like nonviolent offenses or lesser offenses that are, if you get all your good time and you don't get in any trouble, you stay level 4, then you do roughly about a third of your time. So my original sentence was a 10-year, 85% for burglary. And I did. So I did about 4 years on it, and I went back to court. I had two pending burglary cases in another county. So I went back to court on those cases, and they gave me 6 more years on top of my 10 years, 85% that I had to do. So, and that was devastating as well. I'd been in prison. I already came to terms that I was going to have to do 8.5 years. Okay. And I go and get this 6 more years, which it was 1/3 of the time, but still that's 2 more years added onto my sentence. And, I remember coming back to the yard and all my friends were like, oh, everything good, everything good. And I just dropped my head and I was like, no, everything is not good. And they just couldn't believe it. So anyway, I did 7.5 years on my 8.5 year sentence, on my 85% sentence, and I made a commutation from the governor due to programs that I had done, good behavior, uh, keeping a job the whole time while I was in prison. Just everything that I had done good to better myself had finally added up and paid off. So I did the 7.5 years. I made commutation, and I started my 6 year sentence. And I was in some like substance abuse treatment programs. I was in some VOTEC programs all at the same time. Just doing as much as I could, try to better myself. And they ended up giving me good time for those programs. And after it was all said and done, it ended up 9 years. 9 years and 4 months to the day is what it ended up.
Wow. Wow. I want to, you said something during that time um, that when you got back to the yard, you got back and you had the bad news. And I'm just wondering, as a man, I mean, generally in society, men don't show that much emotion. And I'm just wondering, what's that like in prison, navigating your emotions in front of a group of men? Because for us, even in prison, for me at least, and Tunchi, you can chime in, because for me at least, I could cry.
Yeah.
I mean, I could fight 1 minute and cry the next. And by me crying, people really wouldn't think that I couldn't fight, right? So, yeah,
Well,
how was that? Is that different there?
it is different. Just the you can't show any weakness. And I've heard you say that about women's prison as well, but in men's prison especially. So, you know, I did cry a couple times in that 9.5 years. I can't say that I cried a bunch, but I would definitely do it by myself. And when I was at that prison, we had cells that we could go in and close the door and turn the lights off, and it was just you and your cellie in there. So um, you could hide your sadness, your emotions to a point, but whenever you have friends that care about you in there, which I did, I had some good friends that I felt like they were devastated as much as I was when I came back and told them that. They were like, they just couldn't believe it. Nobody could believe it. And so yeah, you definitely want to hide your emotions when you're there. At least your sadness, at least your depression. But it's still there. It doesn't go away for sure. Uh, you have to deal with it one way or another. And you guys know just as well as I do, there's plenty of ways to deal with it, but I chose to face it head on and you know, go and pray about it and just live through it.
I do want to ask you, is because we have something in common. One of my charges is burglary, so I got a 12-year sentence. And most of the women that I knew, I don't know, Marcy, if you know a lot of people that have burglary of habitation. We had 10s, 12s, 15 years, but the men I knew would get 5, 4, 6. Several, and still get just those amount of times, while the women I knew got 2-digit numbers for the same offense. And I think that we anecdotally saw that a lot in terms of sentencing. Do we know that as women that happens, at least in Texas? So would you say that women in Oklahoma would receive the same sentencing as you would have for your charge?
Maybe not for burglary, but, and I don't know how it is in Texas, but I know that if you, women, from what I've been told and what I've seen, what I've read, women would get very harsh sentences if their charge had anything to do with their child. Like, say they broke in a house and they had their child was in the car with somebody, or they're going to get not only that burglary charge, but they're going to get child endangerment, child neglect, which automatically raises that charge from a non-violent crime to a violent crime. And so and I know in Texas they can run your sentences consecutive to each other, and instead of just running them all concurrent, they can do like they did to me and run them all consecutive. I don't know about the burglary, if they got more time for that, but I know that they definitely, if a woman got in trouble and they could any way, shape, or form, tie her child in with that, they would just lay it out. They would just give them the ringer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and Marcy, you talked about your charge. And again, even with money charges, I never heard of men getting the sentences that we would get if you compared the circumstances together. And there is data to show, like James mentioned, that women get punished and sentenced more severely and disciplined inside differently.
Do you know, when I did that, I recently did an interview with Locked In, and we talked about that very thing. And the question was, do I think that I got sentenced more harshly because I was a woman? And my answer was, I'm not so sure that it's because I was a woman necessarily, as a woman in a small town that took money from a prominent man, and they came for me. The guys
Yeah,
came for me in those
yeah.
comments. And I haven't looked up statistics myself, but a lot of them threw statistics in the comments, that men get more time. And I don't know, because I also feel like men make parole faster, because we were incarcerated with a lot of women where their co-defendant was their spouse or boyfriend, and they
Yeah.
would be home on parole already, riding their women in prison, and their ladies just aren't making parole.
I,
So
I think part of that is just due to the overcrowding. Like in Oklahoma, while I was locked up, I know we were number one in the world for incarcerated per capita for men and women, but they had more room for the women, if that makes any sense. The men's facilities were like 112% capacity or something like that, but they still had bed space for the women. So, they were kind of forced to let the men out on parole, whereas, they had room for the women to stay in prison, which sucks. That's not right, but
they
not
want to
right at
keep those
all.
beds. They want to keep those beds full. And
Yeah,
that's kind of, Shaquille's talking about
exactly.
that too. She's asking, are women more likely to be released on parole due to their shorter sentence length, which I don't think women get shorter sentences. Um,
No,
Tunch.
no, and I can go through the data that I had and some of the reports that I had. The reporting from NPR or maybe PBS really focused on the disparities of being disciplined on the inside versus but certainly it applies to sentencing too. But Marcy, a lot of people would say, girl, I want to get transferred down to Texas City or, one of the more predominant regions to get vote, because in Texas there are different regions for parole. So in the Gatesville area, there was the 3 board members that saw that area, right?
Right.
Well,
Right.
women would try to get out of that area to go to
They have a
maybe
better chance.
to have a better chance.
That's
Yeah, yeah,
exactly
yeah.
right. All of a sudden, they've got medical issues to make them go down there, or
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, they're yeah, that it's that's definitely happening for sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk about disciplinary. You brought it up, Jennifer. Disciplinary cases
Oh,
in
this and
prison.
honey, this is probably what makes me, the sentencing makes me frustrated and angry.
The
Um,
sentencing is the beginning of it.
yeah, the
That's where it all
beginning.
starts at. If they would
Yes.
get the sentencing right, or make the changes that need to be changed, then our conversation wouldn't be this intense.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it would give it. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to
If
interrupt.
we
Go
could keep
ahead.
people out of cages and prisons to begin with, but
No crap.
what we noticed, James, was that we felt this was true, and then I got out and I found the research and the reports on it, was that we were disciplined far more harshly over the pettiest shit, like petty. So, for instance, in Texas, you would have a guy that gets a contraband case, and his contraband is a tattoo gun or a shank or something serious, right? Well, he might get his contraband case graded minor. He doesn't get to go to rec for a couple of days. Where me and Marcy get a contraband case for having an extra tampon, and we've got a major case. And we just
Right.
lost 30 days on the phone that we can't talk to our kids. And we just were like, man, I just feel like men won't tolerate this. And I just don't feel like this happens to them. And then I ran across the data. Is it sure enough? And there was a study from a lady at UT, even in the 80s, to show that women are disciplined and over policed, even in custody, versus men. So,
What I so what I found out about that is I was at 3 different prisons in my incarceration. The first prison for 4 years, it was a medium maximum security. That was just because I had so much time left. I went from there to a minimum, and I was there for 3 more years, and then I left that minimum and went to a different minimum for VOTEC. I was doing VOTEC. I was an instructor at a welding VOTEC, and so they just transferred me minimum to minimum. But what I figured out about, at least in Oklahoma on the men's side, it's a lot of it has to do with the facility. So if you're at a facility that has a lot of drugs, a lot of cell phones, a lot of violence, stabbings, beatings, killings, whatever, they're not so petty. You're not going to get a write up for a tattoo gun. You're not going to get a write up for not being in your cell on time or being in the shower during count. But when I went to a facility that didn't have very much contraband, the write-ups just seemed like it was an open dorm facility as well. So, they would call count time and you're supposed to be at your rack for count. And if you weren't, even if they came by to count you after they already counted that dorm and they left, if you got up from your rack and went to the bathroom or went washed your hands or went and got some water or whatever, you still haven't left that dorm, but they would write you up for it. They give you misconduct for it. So, and I actually saw, so as the contraband at that prison began to get more prevalent, they got certain people there that could get more contraband, phones, meth, heroin, and violence started kind of increasing. All those petty write-ups started going away, and they were just focused on the major cases, the phones, the knives, the drugs, and, stuff like
Which
that.
just women don't have those kind of contraband items. And so what you're
Right.
saying makes complete sense.
Right.
Women aren't we are not really killing each other in prison. The violence that's in prison, in a women's prison, is mainly domestic violence. And so they are looking at all of those small things. And in a way, we're losing. We're getting punished because We don't
Right.
have those
They ain't
bad
got nothing
things
better to
going
do.
on. Right. We don't have those major things. My first disciplinary case was I was in the shower during count time. Do you know that I was in a dorm that didn't have, it was my transfer unit. Nobody had a clock. There was no electronics. There wasn't a clock visible to us. I had just come in from work and they called count a little bit early. And
Right.
as soon as the officer came in, count time. And when I tell you, I got out and put my shorts
Oh
and
yeah.
t-shirt on a wet
Oh
body
yeah.
and ran to my bunk. And I was there before she hit the bunk. And that disciplinary case pulled me out of a program where I had special visits with my two daughters that were still in diapers at that time. And it was a longer visit not in the typical visitation room. It was like in the chapel where I could sit in the
Right.
floor and play with them. And there was toys and a rocking chair. And that disciplinary case stopped that. It prevented that. So,
Well, you
She
know,
could. She
Marcy,
could have.
I think like James was saying, that is true, right? Like they got to find something to do if they're bored.
Yeah.
And I certainly agree with that. But I think at the units, because I have been elsewhere than Mountain View, but Mountain View did have its moments of violence, Marcy. And when we did, it was like there's an officer that's been beaten almost to death. Like it doesn't happen, but when it does, people are almost dead. And when those moments would happen, it's women, they don't, well, okay, you know, we start like James described, they tightened on us. It was like the pettiness and the over policing got even tighter when things did pop off. So it almost had the opposite reaction when we acted out. It was almost a panic of squeezing and double downing.
I want to jump on this video. I have a video and it's on
Okay,
here
here we
and
go.
it's gonna work. I think what's gonna happen is it's gonna add another rectangle and play it right here.
Okay. She's
That's
doing
We're gonna find out.
we'll see if it actually works. But it's a TikTok video by Michael Galloway. Michael Galloway's in Houston. He's huge with reentry. He's an incredible guy. I met him last January, and he'll be in LA with me this summer. He and his wife, and he's talking about his first day in prison. And so I wanted to play that, and then let's talk about our experiences. Let's see if this thing works.
Texas prison.
So what
First
happens
day
to
on
you
in.
on your first day
ID
in
unit.
a Texas prison when you finally get housed on your ID unit? Well, before we go any further, I just want to let you know that I am certified. I'm certified to tell you about this experience. That is a 176 number. That number is almost over 10 years old. So, what happens? Well, when you first pull up, you're gonna go to line building. When you're in line building, you're sitting in the cage, and everybody else that's on the unit is gonna be walking by you. So they're gonna peep game at you. They're gonna see your tattoos. They're gonna see how you carry yourself, see what color you are, all that. And they're gonna be trying to holler at you, like, "Hey, what's up, man? Where you from?" So ahead of time, the whole unit's gonna know that you're there, and they're just watching to see where you get housed at. So they have this wonderful saying in Texas prisons: it's fight, F, or bust a 50. Now you know what the F word means. So when I got to prison, when I got to my ID unit, I knew what it was. When I first arrived, I got housed. I was on the Wallace unit out there in West Texas in the middle of nowhere. Hot as hell outside. If it was 105 degrees outside, it was 127 degrees on the wing, and I was in G wing. G ring was on the firewall. Firewall means that it gets the majority of the sun the rest of the day. So as soon as I walk in, it's an 84-man dorm, and I'm looking around, I'm like, okay, I have arrived. Ain't nobody trying to help you with none of your stuff. Everybody's just watching you go to your cell. As soon as you go in your cell, you open it up, man, your celly's gonna come over there, AKA your roommate. He's gonna lace you up and he'll ask you, hey, what's up, man? Who you ride with? And so you'll tell him. So you'll tell him what gang you're part of, and of course, he's gonna burn off, because what he's doing is he's going to let your homeboys know that you just pulled up on the wing. And so they're gonna come up there. So as you're putting your stuff away, mind you, you've been in a chain bus for God knows how long, sweating your balls off, tired, hadn't gotten sleep, and all the bus rides being chained to somebody you don't want to be chained to. And of course your homeboy's gonna pull up. You're gonna be like, hey, what's up, man? who you ride with, man. They're just verified. So you tell them who you are. They're gonna ask if you're a sex offender, all that good stuff. You're gonna check paperwork. After you check paperwork, you're gonna have it on your mind. They do this wonderful thing called a hard check. So what a hard check is the ability to be able to determine whether you can hold your own and whether you'll be able to have everybody else's back in the event that something goes down. So what Wallace did was they did 2-on-1. That means two of my homeboys are gonna run in on me, and I'm gonna have to fight both of them. Now, mind you, a hard check, you are not meant to win, okay? So if you do win, you got something. But the purpose of it is to see that you don't back down. So they're gonna run in on you, and on my first day, they ran in on me. Of course, I've already had 2 hard checks on previous units, so I was seasoned for this one. But it goes down like that. Like and comment for part 2.
Heart check. First of all, are you proud that the video worked?
I'm impressed with your creativity, because you could have just shared the screen, but you refused to do that, and you're like, nope, I'm going to make it work my way. And
Because
so, hats
this
off to you.
studio is set up. This studio is set up for us to show videos. I'm just not quite smart enough to figure out how to do it.
Honey, because all you have to do is share the screen.
Okay.
We'll try that sometime, but that I'm
Heart
very
check.
impressed. That worked. I'm giving
And you
a
didn't think
star.
it was. You
I
had doubt.
didn't. I didn't have a lot of faith in it, but you proved me wrong.
Can we get to what Michael was talking about?
Yes.
A heart check. This fascinates me. This is not something that happens in women's prisons.
Oh, really?
Yeah. James,
What?
you know about a heart check?
Oh, yeah. It definitely it takes place all the way from county jail, up until you go to prison. I think it kind of depends on what pod you land in the county jail, and who you are. If you walk in there and you've got 5 buddies in county jail, it's the county that you live in, so you're bound to know somebody in there, especially if you're, living that lifestyle. With the potential to go to jail, you're running around with other people that are probably going to go to jail at one point in time. So, yeah, but so I'll just tell you about my first day. And when I got to the medium and maximum security prison, that my very first prison. So in Oklahoma, you go to A&R, which is assessment and receiving. You're there for an undetermined amount of time, until they find you a bed. That coincides with your security points and how much time you have, whether it be maximum, medium, minimum, work center, halfway house, wherever you land. So I was at A&R for like 7 days, which is a very short amount of time, thank God, because it's, that's just, you're locked in your cell, and only you come out for 1 hour a day. You get to take a cold shower. They bring your meals to the door. There's no TV. If you're lucky, they'll send you a book in there. It's just horrible. So my first day, when I got to the medium maximum that I was at, I didn't know anything about any of the prisons, but luckily I got to a very good one. Very laid back, a lot of lifers there. My first cellmate was doing a life sentence. He was an older guy, but I didn't have the same experience that guy had. Maybe because of the way that I carry myself, partly because of the way I carry myself, partly because it was a laid back facility. The unit I was on was, like I said, a bunch of old guys doing life sentences. They didn't really care about me. As long as I didn't, blow up the microwave or ruin the toaster, they didn't care what I did, So I can't say that my experience there was the same, but when I went from the medium maximum to the minimum 4 years later, it was definitely more violent, and it was definitely more live, as for prison slang. It was live, and I didn't get heart checked there, but I saw a lot of guys come through there that didn't earn the respect maybe that I had earned for being in for 4 years like I had been, that would definitely get heart checked. And it goes down just like that guy said it does. I mean, they're going to come in there and they're going to see if you're going to fight. And if you're not going to fight, then they're probably going to take advantage of you, and they're going to take your stuff and treat you like crap. And, that's just how it goes. Luckily, I didn't experience it. Luckily, I had earned a lot of respect while I was in prison. I carry myself very well. And so I didn't experience the heart check, at least not in prison. I did in county jail, but that's another story.
Yeah, that's a whole nother world. We were just
That's a whole
we were
nother
talking
podcast
about
right
that.
there.
That's right. We were talking about that. What about you, Tunchi? What about you walking in the first time? Like, I can relate to what Michael was saying about everybody. I felt like I was being sized up, not necessarily to fight, but
Right.
just to see what I was about.
Yeah. No. So my first time, I was 17. I was a week away from turning 18, and we didn't have Plain State or Woodman. So reception was reception at Crane Unit, at the Gatesville unit. And I walked in by myself. The van dropped me off from the Texas Youth Commission. And to me, it sounds like the same exact experience, except instead of physical testing, it's emotional testing. It's psychological testing. That's the only difference. Everything that he described reminds me of intake, of, like you said, being sized up, people asking what county you from, what city.
Oh yeah.
Maybe not necessarily the gang stuff, but the
What
city
you
and the
charge
county,
how
what
much
to
time you
charge,
have.
all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
But women are testing you in very different ways to see if they can run over you or manipulate you or use you. And that's testing. I like to think of like the way that we're different can really be summed up in that men's behaviors is very overt and women are very covert. So everything that we were doing was this subtle psychological testing of boundaries. And can you hold your own? Can you tell me no? Can you be firm?
Yeah,
Are you
definitely.
easily manipulated? And I think that there is some of that physicality with women, and there is definitely the psychological, emotional with men, but it's like
Definitely.
we're kind of the opposite in terms of what's more predominant. And I had to learn as a teenager. Now, I had already been in a youth facility, which was far worse than any adult facility I've ever been in. So I kind of was prepared. But Marcy, I'm sure that you experienced very similar things coming through intake.
I did, but I don't remember anybody asking about my charge. I people wanted to know my sentence, and they were always shocked. And there was even some times during my incarceration where people even were like, there was like a rumor that, oh, she's not here for a money crime, like she did something. And I'm like, I didn't even show my paperwork for that. Like, I was just like, tell your family to look me up. You like Google my name. I'm made the front page of my little tiny Texas Towns newspaper. Like, just it's easy enough to look up somebody's charge. So I don't remember, but you remember people asking about charges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, some bold people did. I think we were careful in the ways that we did that, but no, definitely people, because I was so young, maybe that's why people felt more curious to just blatantly ask. And it's funny, right? Like, because there is something very unique about us that we did create rumors about one another that, no, girl, she's not here for a money crime. She's here for,
yeah,
putting a baby in a river or something, like really outlandish. Hey, did you hear this girl that put a baby in a microwave? And I'm like, that's not true. That's an urban legend. I've never met anyone here that has done
that. Let me stop you right there. So I'll add to that. My first day in prison, I told you my cellie was a older gentleman doing a life sentence. My next door neighbor, I get there, don't have nothing, whatever they give you, a towel, a couple pairs of underwear, and whatever you got on your back. So a guy, my next door neighbor, maybe 2 doors down, he comes over, and big guy, tattoos all over his arms, comes in, very intimidating guy. I'm not a big guy. I'm like 5'8", 150 pounds. So he comes and gets me. He's like, "Hey man, let me come over here and let me talk to you." So I go to his cell, and first thing he asks me, he looks me in my eyes, and I'm looking him in his eyes, and he just wants to see if I'm being honest. He said, "What are you in prison for?" And I tell him I'm not ashamed of, you know, being in prison for burglary. That's not a crime that you're ashamed of in prison. I'm not excited about it, definitely out here, but anyway, that's not the answer that he was looking for. So I said, "Yeah, I'm in here for burglary, forgery, yada yada yada." And he said, "Okay." So he starts getting some stuff out of his locker, like coffee, soups, envelopes, stamps to give me so I could write my family. I could drink a cup of coffee and eat a soup and whatnot. And we talked for about 10 minutes, and he said, "Well, when the case manager gets here tomorrow, you're going to have to move out of that cell." And I said, "Well, what do you mean I'm going to have to move out of that cell?" And he said, "I know this may sound crazy, but," he said, "that guy's in here for putting a baby in the microwave." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, you can't live there. If you live there, then they're going to profile you as being being friends with that guy and being, okay with his crime." So I moved out of that cell the next day when the case manager got there, and the case manager did not give me any grief about it or anything like that. And all those years, I always wondered, was that guy really in prison for that? And so
Right.
when I got out, I looked him up, and I remembered his name. I remember what he looks like, and sure enough, he put his
That was
grandson,
true.
his daughter's son, his grandson, in a microwave and killed the baby.
Well,
No
Oh,
lie.
James, you
I
have
know I was not trying to one up you. I
no,
promise you.
you have myths and rumors are usually rooted somewhere in something happening at some point. Um, so you have proven that horrible myth true, at least in Oklahoma.
At
well,
least in
and
Oklahoma.
At least
I
in
looked up.
Oklahoma.
There was a girl on Lane Murray. She's still there now. She had a big sentence, and that was everybody said that about her. And then they went on to say she then fed her baby to her spouse. Like this was the rumor.
Right.
What? Tell me, Tunch, tell me.
No, I've heard that. That was the second part of the rumor.
Right, right.
Yeah,
When I got home, I looked her up. No, that's not what happened. She
right.
she did lose her baby, and it was something not as horrific or intentional as that. Probably she lost her shit, and it was a shaken baby syndrome type situation. But it was not feed to your
Not a
spouse.
microwave.
And everybody believed it. I mean, it was
Everybody
just
believed it. There was stuff that people believed. Hey, that even when I was in there, I fully. Let me tell you one example. Okay, so there was a lady that she worked in Braille for many years, and she had a story that she had unalived her abusive spouse, and it was like, man, gosh, damn, she had the whole story. She had the whole story, y'all. Well, she makes parole. She gets released. And this was around the time when, it was kind of new looking people up and that kind of stuff. Right. Well, there was one place that you could always see where somebody got transferred to was
The
laundry.
kitchen.
Because
Oh, the
in the
laundry.
kitchen
oh
Okay.
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got the roster.
Yeah.
So she's been transferred to Hilltop for a
Oh,
program. Oh, well, we know
good.
what program that is.
So,
That
the
is,
people that don't know, that's the sex offender program. If you
yeah,
have a sex crime, you have to
Where
complete
they send
this.
you.
yes,
That's where
for the
they send
women.
you at the end of your time. It's an 18-month program, I
Yeah.
think.
Pretty
Oh
Wow.
wow.
intensive, right? And so the Braille manager, they were having this big celebration about something, and she was just like, I would hate for her to miss that. She's worked here for years. I'm going to get special permission for her to come back to Mountain View for that day. Okay. And she did that on her own. Now, only my one friend that was down there knew that she was getting her pulled back. It was going to be a surprise. Girl, and we had a long street like Lane Murray. On the back of the unit was our main street. Well, we had two main ones, one that went to the rec yard and one that went to the chow hall. And she's
Mhm.
walking this main, and everybody, Marcy, everybody was at the windows in the dorms looking at her. Nobody yelled at her, said anything, and we just watched her walk this long walk of shame and just looking at her face, she's just mortified. Because now we all know that what you said for all these years was a big fat lie. And it's like, I get why you did, because people are judgmental. And I do my best never to be judgmental, because I've lost my mind and done very violent things. So who am I to judge anybody, what someone's circumstances are? But I just felt so like, oh my God, how horrible for her. But it kind of leads me to the question in terms of like men and women. Like, I know men react very strongly in a certain way against certain charges. And people always ask me and Marcy and other women how we respond. And for the most part, I mean, even when we know that it's something really egregious and heinous or crazy, or we're like, girl, that's just Debbie. You just kind of compartmentalize it and put it out of your mind. And she's just another woman that's there. So I don't know, Marcy, would you agree?
I definitely would agree. There was a couple of pretty horrendous crimes, like starving a child for years until they died, keeping them in a cabinet type stuff. There was a couple of women that I personally had a really hard time engaging with, but
they're kind of their own. They're over there and everybody else is over here type deal.
Well, not so much where I was, though. That's what I was going to finish with, is that they were still just living their life. They were just living their life in there. And even in relationships, just the same thing, playing dominoes, engaging, doing business with everybody. It wasn't. And people are genuinely shocked when I say things like that. But that's what it was. There's definitely, we had a lot of child crime people in there.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, tell us how it was where you were.
That first prison I went to, another reason why it was so laid back is because it was a lot of elderly sex offenders were there. I don't know what it is about old men and committing sex crimes, but they go hand in hand. Not that every old man is like that, but you guys know what I mean. I don't know if it goes the same way for women or not, but so coming from that prison, when I went to the next prison that I was at, when I got shipped to minimum security, everybody was like, oh my God, how did you even stay there? How could you be around those people? You know what I mean? Because, all the case managers aren't as nice as the first one I encountered to let you move. You don't get to choose where you live. They put you in a cell. That's where you're going to stay. If you don't stay there, then they're going to give you a misconduct for refusing housing. So anyway, I got those 4 years. I just got used to it. I didn't want to ask questions of nobody. So, like you're saying, we all lived amongst each other. Everything was, you might have known what Billy Tilly was in there for, but if you didn't like it, then you didn't mess with him. Then you didn't bother him. You don't do business with him. You don't share with him. You don't let him borrow anything. But so when I went to the other two prisons, their view of sex offenders was totally different. The first minimum I went to, sex offenders were not even allowed there. There was not one sex offender on the yard. So for 3 years, there was no sex offenders around me. And then the next facility, the last facility I went to, if you were a sex offender, you did not want to tell anybody. And for fear of violence. And it wasn't just, those were minimum security prisons. At the medium maximum security prisons, at the private prisons that they have in Oklahoma, the violence towards sex offenders, they usually keep them on a separate unit. They'll usually keep like one pod is just all sex offenders, because if they don't, they are going to get preyed upon. They are going to get beat up. If they ever order commissary, they're going to get their commissary taken. And I never participated in that just because I don't think it's right. It wasn't right for them to commit a crime, but it wasn't right for me to steal shit neither. So, what's the difference? Who am I to try to judge this guy and be violent toward them or take their stuff or whatever? But just because I don't agree with it doesn't mean there's a lot more people out there that don't see it the way that I see it. A lot more that don't see it that way than do see it that way. And that's just how it is in here. You girls know that.
Tunch, I want you to look at Rhonda's question because she said all the crazies were at Murray, and I was at Murray. So,
Hey, if it's any consolation, I was at Murray when I was 18.
right, I did my time on Murray.
Hey, Rhonda. Yeah, Hilltop is known for the youthful, and language does matter, so we're trying hard not to use certain words, but youthful offender program and the sex offender program. So, which is weird, right? Like,
yeah,
why are those two housed there? And then the other folks that were there were usually short time, smaller sentences, kind of a mixture of people. And maybe you just didn't realize the programs were there because they're not super big.
And they're separate.
But
both
yes,
those
they
programs
are
are kept separate from the general
yeah,
population.
very, very separate.
So you weren't like
Yeah.
in the chow hall with the people that were attending the sex offender program, or you weren't at the chapel,
okay.
or so it was separate. So that's maybe why you didn't notice that. So,
but let's talk about the crazies at Lane Murray. So, no, well, Mountain View for many years now, it's known for older people and people with health conditions because of the air conditioning after the lawsuits. But typically, Mountain View was for really, really serious offenses, people with life sentences, big times. But then as women were sentenced worse and worse, obviously that didn't hold true to keep them all there. But Mountain View was at one time a unit within the Texas Youth Commission that also housed boys that were deemed ultra violent. So our unit did have a lot of women with serious offenses and deep mental health problems. We had the psych center was there, and death row. So we had our fair share of a lot of mental health, but I mean, that's at all the units now. Rhonda, honey, if you were there in 0509, those programs are there. But like Marcy said, you probably didn't see them because they are tightly controlled and they aren't allowed to interact with the rest of the unit, especially the kids.
We have to talk.
Marcy, I wanted to.
Yeah, you go.
Oh, okay.
Go, Tunch.
I just wanted to, because it was relevant to our experience this week. Shaquille Oatmeal, I love to say the last part of that every time. Are female inmates less likely to receive mental health treatment and medical care than male inmates? We recently just testified on some legislation about why that would be true in our experience in Texas. And that's because there are some mental health treatments. I use that loosely on the units, but big treatment, hospital treatment requires medical transportation on those medical chain buses. James was talking about, Michael was talking about in his video, that are horrific for everybody, but for women, especially being chained to somebody trying to change your feminine products on as Marcy told the legislators, on a canister with a hole in it, and being strip searched where you're told to show the pink. I want you to know that everybody in the room, suddenly they were wide awake then.
I needed their attention.
Honey, but it was true.
Well, the warden,
that
TDCJ warden got up there and blatantly lied and misled the legislators to believe that the hole that people use the restroom on a Bluebird for transport, which James, a Bluebird is what we call prison transport buses in prison. That's the brand.
The white buses.
The white buses, that's right.
Yeah.
But she led them to believe it was like maybe a Greyhound bus bathroom.
Yeah.
where you close the door and this,
Yeah.
it's tight and
Check your
uncomfortable.
hair
And
in the
no,
mirror when you
lady.
get done.
Right.
Yeah. Right? Marcy was like, no, it's about the size of this podium, and there's somebody sitting right here and right here, and it's a hole. It was great. It really was. My folks said that we did some great testimony. It was stark, and that's what they need to
Yeah.
hear. And in relation to that question is, there are unique things that we experience as women and how we experience shame and probably put into us from society, right? That we would rather forego medical treatment, how severe it is, than to have to endure the indignities that we endure on that trip.
So there are lots of women that deny their medical care because they don't want to go on those chain buses.
Yeah.
And
And
especially if
they,
you're having kind of feminine surgery where you're bleeding, trying to travel 8-9 hours, stopping and trying to use that restroom to take care of that. That's almost, you just almost rather deal with whatever medical condition you have. For sure. We're like down to 10 minutes. And so Tunchi, we need to decide what people have asked us most about. So I want to do like a quick answers of I'll just ask both of y'all like what's the most common contraband and then maybe the most severe contraband you've ever found or ever been
Okay.
aware of while you were in prison. So the most common and like the most severe contraband, James, what were those like couple items?
most common, tattoo guns, tobacco, cigarettes, like a little pencil that you stick in the wall to make a lighter with a wire with a razor blade in it. And I'll say the most severe contraband that I ever saw was it was a bag about this big and it was filled with meth. It was about maybe a little bit less than a pound of meth. And
Wow.
I had never seen that amount of drugs before I ever went to prison, which I didn't do meth. So it wasn't, I wasn't really around it. But yeah, it was, I walked
Wow.
by in
The
an
size
open
of a
dorm.
brick.
Yeah, it was like that big.
Wow. Tunch.
Okay, the most common, it's free world makeup, baby. Put it in that little the cellophane you get from the kitchen, and you baggy it up and you sell it in these little. That's the most common. The most serious, that's neck and neck here. A homemade shank, a real
Yeah.
one from maintenance. They made this, and it was bad. It went badly. Like I said, at Mountain View, when it does happen, it was bad. Movie style stuff, but not very often. Most common dangerous in terms of TDCJ. Marcy, the homemade dildo. That's real.
They
get fancy and they get
and they will freak out.
That's a big deal.
Staff will
Oh,
freak
yeah.
out more over a homemade sex toy than they do over a razor blade
Razors.
tied to a pencil that you are intending to cut somebody with. Women's prisons, the staff is so obsessed with stopping homosexuality, they would rather you fight than FUCK. And that's just,
Yeah.
I said that through my whole
Oh, yeah.
incarceration. Like they would rather us break out in a riot than go down on each other. That's just to be very blunt. And that's the truth.
What? Marcy, I wasn't ready.
You were
I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't.
okay. Well, let's talk
wasn't
about
ready.
homosexuality, the stigma of homosexuality.
I want you to stop saying
Get
it
yourself
like that.
together. How do you
You're
want me
really
to say it?
pronouncing the O's in
How
that.
do you want me to say it?
You're because you sound like a real religious person.
Homosexuality.
Yeah, like it's sounding real Southern right
Yes,
then.
you
It's
did.
really a lot of
Well,
anxiety.
I guys, one of my friends is a super prison TikTok all-star, and I can quote him. That's Colin Ray. I've had this conversation with him because it intrigues me so much, the differences in that, whatever you want to call it. and in between men's and women's prisons, he did his time in Pennsylvania, and he said, and guys, Colin is an all-inclusive guy. He supports all inclusion, and his content shows that. He lives his life that way. But while he was in prison, he said, "Hey, you don't talk to the punks." That's how he worded it. You don't talk to them. You don't get around them. You can do business, but you can't hang out. You can't bullshit, because you will then be a
Be
target.
labeled.
So
You'll be
James,
labeled.
yeah, and like in a 1.5 minutes, because we're
Yeah.
wrapping it up. But how was that on your unit?
That again kind of goes with unit to unit, whatever unit you're on. The second unit I was at, there was some homosexual activity, but it was way undercover. They weren't walking around flamboyantly, letting everybody know. But the first facility that I was at, the one with all the old men, all the old sex offenders, they would walk around with their shirts tucked in like a tube top, and carrying little
Very
purses.
open.
Yeah, and have they had like bra stuff. It was just like I'd never seen anything like that before. Whenever I went to prison, and I'm like, what? Long hair, very flamboyant, very over the top. But at other prisons, they didn't want anybody to know about it. And if you were in a relationship with one of those if you were in a homosexual relationship with a punk and you were at a certain prison, that's probably going to be your only friend. And nobody's going to do a business with you. Like you said, nobody's, you might find other punks that will, associate with you. Nobody's going to sit at the chow hall table with you. Nobody's going to walk to chow with you, walk to the library with you, walk, anywhere. So again, it kind of goes depending on what prison you're at. But, for the most part, what I saw is at minimum securities, it was, pretty undercover. You don't want to, they didn't want anybody to know. They didn't want to be flamboyant about it. They didn't want to be showy about it.
Gee, how was that in a women's prison, since you were a man?
Oh, because I'm God. Boy, you're really coming in with the heat. You're really showing out tonight. Marcy's showing out on the rec yard.
Showing out.
And you know what happens when you start showing out in front of folks. Well, people did call me he, which, if that's how you identify, that's fine. But I didn't. And I used to get very frustrated because I'm like, I identify as a lesbian, like your old aunt, that likes to read books and has a cat, and that stereotype, right?
Nana.
But yes, Nana. And so, but the staff treated me very poorly until they got to know me, and then they saw, oh, she's not a stud broad. That's what we call butch women in prison.
Yeah.
She's Nana, right? Like she's the aunt that has a special friend. And it seemed I got a little bit treated a little bit different, a little bit better from staff. But those of us that were clearly lesbians that identified as butch women were treated by the staff, by the male staff, pretty damn bad. It depended on the female staff. Sometimes you would get they would baby you and treat you very, very, very well with a lot of special favors, or they would kind of just be on your ass a little bit. But that was just from staff. We never, and I was going to say that earlier, in terms of women, like maybe we had cliques and families, but we were really, all of us were the same, whether it's charges, race. I mean, we had tensions. I'm not saying that, but we were all just in it together. I mean, that's how I always felt. I don't know, Marcy. What do you
No,
think?
I think that's exactly right. We clicked up, but our clicks weren't based on gangs. They weren't based on race, just like you said. We had play families. I had a play mama. I had lots of play daughters, play sons, play sisters. We looked out for each other, definitely. And so, like, we are like down to the nitty gritty. But you were in a couple different prisons. But tell me about gangs in Oklahoma prisons. I want to know, are gangs in Oklahoma prisons? Do you feel like you have to be affiliated? And are they based on race? Can you answer that like
They're,
fast? Because we're at our hour.
yeah, they're definitely based on race. Definitely based on race. And for new people that come in, new guys that come in, they'll definitely pressure you and make you feel like you need to join a gang or you need to be part of their gang, or they're going to make you be part of the gang, or they're going to hurt you if you don't. Um, I kind of went in with a different mindset, so I didn't join a gang, and that left me open, to have friends in every gang. If you're part of one gang, you're really not going to venture outside of that gang to have any friends. Maybe the top leaders of that gang, would associate with other gang members or gang leaders or whatnot. But it they will definitely make you feel like you need to be part of that gang. And if you're not part of that gang, you're not going to be part of the crowd. You're going to be in danger, whether it be them that's going to hurt you or whether it be other gang members that are going to hurt you. And and it does fall that way sometimes. If you're not part of the gang, sometimes you do get taken advantage of, and I've been in that position because I wasn't part of the gang. But luckily, I did have a lot of respect from gang members and gang leaders that had my back, even though I didn't have that certain tattoo on me. I was just as, they cared about me just as much as they cared about anybody else. So, I think a lot of it is how you carry yourself and the respect that you gain while you're in there. But it, depending on where you're at, for safety reasons, it you will feel like you need to be part of that gang for sure.
Tunchi, so what about gangs what about gangs? Let me tell you what I know about gangs. Sometimes somebody would say, my boyfriend's Tango Blast. That's the
Right.
extent of prison gangs in women's prisons in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years of dealing at several different units, dealing with folks, and always being nosy. I was very nosy. I knew everything that was going on in the unit. Never had a gang issue problem. Somebody would say my boyfriend's a part of this brotherhood or this, and people would just be like, girl, whatever, your boyfriend is sitting on your mama's couch, like, just knock it off. Now, there was one lady that was in protective custody because of something related to her charge and gang stuff for her safety, because I think maybe she rolled
She
on
done something against
somebody.
another gang.
Yeah, and so, like, it was so severe. And the thing was, you could put her among us. Nobody's gonna mess with her. But it must have been really bad. But she stayed in protective custody. But that was the only one.
Okay. So
I
I
would
have one.
definitely that's definitely a subject that I would like to touch on the next podcast, because
Yeah.
I do have friends that are still there. I talked to one last weekend, and some of them are in gangs and some of them aren't. And one of my buddies that I talked to the other day, he actually just got out of the hospital. He got stabbed, his lung collapsed by a rival gang member. So
Yeah,
that
that's
would be
we
another
could do a
subject I'd
whole
like to talk about.
we could do a whole episode on gangs for sure. Okay, quickly, because we're over our hour. Thank y'all for hanging on. We have so many people on here watching right now, and we're so grateful for it. So there is legislation right now. It's House Bill 1524. It's for body cameras on correctional officers. So the same way that police officers in Texas have to wear body cameras, this legislation would make correction officers wear body cameras. So I'm for it all the way, and it's because my experience with officers sexually assaulting female inmates, officers using unnecessary force on female inmates. But when I put that like call to action on a certain Facebook page that is predominantly formerly incarcerated men, they were like, no, we do not want those officers to have body cameras because we will lose our hustle. So, like in 60 seconds or less, James, what are your thoughts on body cameras for correctional officers?
They'll never do it. I think that it would be very wise for their safety as well. You know, just like body cams are good for police officers, but they'll never do it. I'm sure Texas is very much like Oklahoma. A lot of contraband comes in through the officers, and not just contraband, but the way that they treat you. You know, they don't want that on camera. They don't want that saved on video somewhere. The way that they treat you like crap and don't care about you, and you know, doing cell searches and throw your pictures of your family on the ground and step on them. You know, they don't want that on because then they have to remember that they did that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, you're
they'll
right.
I don't believe they'll ever do it. I wish they would. I wish they'd be held accountable for what they do. You know, I live by, I'll be quick. I live by a motto from day one that I went in there. I was sent to prison as my punishment. I wasn't sent to prison to be punished anymore. My punishment was to be sent to prison.
Tooch, body cameras.
Oh, body cameras. I mean, they would turn them on and off like, police officers do. But, our experience as women are very different than the men that had such a strong reaction to it, is that we have to deal with a lot of sexual harassment and a lot of threat of sexual assaults from correctional staff, and having that would be a level of accountability, at least to some degree.
Yeah.
And the inappropriate uses of force, because women get slammed. We talked about the harsh disciplinary. You can get slammed for, well, I think that goes for anybody, but women with some of those male officers will just slam you just to beat up on a woman. So
Definitely. Guys, there are a few questions in the chat that we didn't get to answer on here, and I promise I'll go back and hand answer those questions. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in on the Rec Yard. I've had such a good night. Thank you, James, for sharing your thoughts. I appreciate you. Tunchi and I will be here 1 week from now, Wednesday, 7 o'clock, same
that
time,
was for
same.
Lori.
Yes. Yes, same time, same place. As some of our closest friends are texting us that they're watching another documentary instead of hanging on the show with us.
And that Brooke Shields documentary can wait. Pretty Baby can wait.
Well, she could record that.
Yeah.
It's on
You can
Hulu. She
rewind
can
it.
watch it anytime. James is right. Anytime.
Yes. So thanks so much, everybody. And we will see you next week. And we're going to do our